Greetings of the day, everyone. I'm privileged to welcome you all into the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival, organized by SDR Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Raisoni University, powered by Raisoni Group of Institutions. I am Anshul Bhatia, delighted to be your anchor for today's session, The Begum and The Dastan, by Dr. Tarana Husain Khan, in conversation with Mr. Amitabh Singh Baghel. Dr. Tarana Husain Khan is a writer and food historian based in Rampur. Her articles on Rampur cuisine, culture, and oral history have appeared in Eden Magazine, Scroll, The Wire, and Daily O. She wrote a monthly column on Rampur cuisine food fables in the Daily O. Her historical fiction, The Begum and the Dastan, published in 2021 by Tranquebar, is the winner of the Book of the Year award in the fiction category at the Kalinga Literature Festival 2021. She has contributed a short story to the anthologies Desi Delicacies, Pan Macmillan India, and Dastarkwan, Food Writing from South Asia, and Diaspora, Beacon Books UK. She hosts, curates a website on Rampur culture and oral history with the website called taranakhanauthor.com. She also curates the Forgotten Food series of articles on Scroll. Her book on Rampur cuisine, called The Rampuri Cuisine Food Fables, Memories and Recipes, shall be published by Penguin India in 2022. She is currently working on a Global Challenges Research Fund and Arts and Humanities Research Council funded research project, Forgotten Food, Culinary Memory, Local Heritage and Lost Agricultural Varieties in India. Her first novel, I'm Not a Bimbit, which was published in 2015, and its sequel, Cyberbullied, published in 2020, were published by Juggernaut Books. She founded the Rampur Book Club in 2016 to promote the reading of the world literature in Rampur. It's an honor to have you with us, Dr. Tarana Husain Khan, and this gets even more delightful as we have Mr. Amitabh Singh Baghel, who will be in conversation with her as the moderator. Amitabh Singh Baghel is a former bureaucrat, an exhibited and published photographer, and is a lover of prose and poetry. He speaks and writes on varied subjects like the ecological conservation, development, consumerism, tourism, gender, and cinema. He has been published by national and international journals. He has also been featured in, organized, and has advised literature festivals in India. Not only this, but he has also recently started poetry appreciation sessions, which began serendipitously with requests from a group of IITians based out of the US. He is currently associated with All India Professionals Congress as the state coordinator for Uttar Pradesh West. I once again welcome you, ma'am, and I welcome you, sir. Also, before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Westland Publication as their association is valuable to OCLF. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two very dynamic individuals. So, without any delay, I humbly invite Mr. Amitabh Singh Baghel to lead us ahead.
Thank you very much, Achal. That was a very generous introduction.
My
Usually
pleasure.
people cut short the intro, but you have been very kind with us. And I am so privileged and blessed to be with Tarana, who happens to be a friend, a fellow member of one book club of which we are both members. And that is a place which is common to us and it's close to our heart. At the moment, I am sitting here and doing this session from the same place. That's Nainital. Such a pleasure to see you, Tarana. And
it's great to see you. Thank you so much, Amitabh, for doing this. I'm sure it's going to be just great
I'm
chatting
looking
with
forward
you.
to it. And like I always say, I'm a little nervous when I'm in your company. Let's hope
Oh
I
my God.
deliver what is expected of me. See, the moment you launched your book, and I was perhaps one of the first few people who chose to order it. And I'll be very honest and frank with you that I was not expecting it to read the way it read. The narration was so fluid,
Oh,
it was so engrossing that when I picked the book, I could keep it only when I finished it. And
oh, thank you.
and you wrote like a pro. I mean, you can see these books in my background. It's not a wallpaper. At times, people ask me if it is that. And having had read and having been a person who loves books, uh, and despite that, when I picked your book, it was something very new, very different, and very fluid, like I said. So, my first question to you, Tarana, would be that what is it that drives you? What was it that created the passion in you to start your journey as a author, as a writer? I believe you have been writing, contributing to various magazines like Anchal just shared with us. So, what was it that inspired you to begin your writing? And
Thank
you
you
can
so
follow
much.
that up. I'm sorry, you
Yes.
can follow that up with a
Yeah.
response to what is it that drove you to write this book? Perhaps this is your first, if I'm not wrong. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amitabh, and thank you, Orange City Lit Fest, for having me here. It's a pleasure. Amitabh, you've been really generous with your praise, and I am so happy that you like my writing. Like you said, Nainital is something that both of us hold close to our hearts. It's such a magical, beautiful place, and there were those hours and hours of reading at the yachting club at Nainital while my father was sailing. I think that was the beginning of a lifelong love for reading and writing. I came to writing comparatively late in the sense of getting it published, because I was a teacher, and you know that I taught at All Saints also, and I love teaching. But when I got into writing, when I came to Rampur, rather, came back to Rampur after being in different places, I just wanted to know more about this city because it is a city of my grandparents also and my husband's ancestors as well. So I started researching and Rampur about Rampur culture, about its cuisine, and the different oral histories. So when the Begum and the Dastan came from this story that I had heard repeated over and over again, where, women and men, they sit around and they say, oh, did you hear about this Begum? And, then they carried on talking about this Begum. So this was a story that over the years I had heard repeated. It was changed. Some people said something about the Begum, somebody said something else, and it just stayed with me somehow. Things always stay with me, and then they come out of nowhere, and they haunt me. So the story of Firoza Begum, which I have narrated in the Begum and the Dastan, haunted me for several years. Yes. It really haunted me because this was the story of a Begum who was a very spirited, intelligent, and independent person living in the late 19th century, and she was detained by the Nawab in the harem. So, my question to all the people was, what happened to her? I know that she married the Nawab, she had a daughter by him, but what happened to her? How did she live? And, there were various tales of the harem, but, there was nothing very clear about her. And I realized that most of the history that we read is a cisgendered kind of history, male dominated, and where women have just disappeared off the pages of history. And sometimes they are, a slight, line about them if they have birthed a child from the Nawab or a ruler. That's it. So this is something that that used to bother me. And it just took me on a journey where I wanted to find out about her from oral history, from written histories, from going through the harem. What were the lanes and the by lanes of the harem? All of that. So that was the beginning of my writing journey, Amitabh, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful journey up to now. Let's see.
Thank you, Tarana. You have given us more than a peek into your book and the story which you present to us through your book. Also, I see that you have borrowed some ideas from a certain diary, which you have referred to in your book. And this I have learned from our earlier conversations. And I see that there is a difference in the narrative, or difference in the story, or perhaps the perspective which is presented in the diary and the story that you tell, which you just uh, took us through. I mean, just a bit of it, like I said, a peek into that story. So I would like to read a bit from an excerpt which you present in the beginning of your chapters. This is on page number 31. Firoza Begum, Benazir Palace, Sherpur, 1896. When Firoza Begum laid eyes on the Nawab, she was struck dumb with awe at his wondrous persona. When the time came for her to depart, she fell at the Begum's feet, imploring her to let her stay for some more time. It became obvious to all that she was unhappy with her husband and in love with the Nawab. Firoza Begum promised to spend her life as the Nawab's servant girl. She even threatened to take her life if she was sent back. The elders of her family and her in-laws came to the Nawab asking for a solution. I'll leave it at that. But very clearly, the story, I mean, the perspective which is being, the person who's written the diary, her name is given over here, Bilqis Begum. She is trying to say that it was the Begum who wanted to stay on, and perhaps she was pestering those who were living in the palace to let her stay. Whereas what you tell us in the story is that she was actually captured by the Nawab and she was forcefully uh, held hostage over there against her will. So why is, I mean, what led you to explore into this part? Whereas the narrative before you was very clear that there was a certain Begum, she wanted to stay over there, and she on her will stayed over there. How did you manage to reach this part of the story? And how much of truth is there in the story that you tell us? And how much of the story is laced with fiction?
Well, thank you for that wonderful question. I remember that was the first thing you asked me after reading the book, and I was really, struck because most of the chapters that talk about Firoza Begum begin with what was written about her, in the official and the unofficial histories and the letters, etc. So this particular diary I found, it was, when you try searching for things, you find diaries, and this was a diary about the different Begums, and one of the Begums was Firoza Begum. Now remember, her being kept in the harem was a very major thing because it brought a lot of disrepute to the Nawab also. Now this lady who is trying to defend, according to me, because you see, all the oral histories that I have come across, and a lot of family histories, oral histories that I have come across, all speak about how this Begum was captured by the Nawab. However, the written official and unofficial histories talk about that the fact that she was just in awe of the Nawab and the riches and the glamour, and she said, I want to get married to the Nawab. Now the question is, an already married woman expecting her first child suddenly falls in love with the Nawab, sees him, falls in love with him, and says, I'm not going home. And okay, it can happen. it might happen. But how do you explain that the whole family just runs away from the place, fearing retribution by the Nawab? Why would the family run away? So these were totally different points of view that were clashing. So while I was writing, I decided to put together the story which I got through the oral histories, and the story that is written in the official and the unofficial narratives, which kind of defend the Nawab. So that's how I begin every chapter. And it was only through a lot of research, and she wasn't just one person who suffered at the hands of the Nawab. The Nawab was known for distressing a number of families and people. The only difference with her, in her case, was that she belonged to a very good family, and so it created a lot of controversy at that time, which lives on the lips of people today.
think she
So
herself
that
belonged
is the
to a,
story.
sorry, she herself belonged to a frontline noble family. She
Yes,
was, yeah, she was the daughter of one of the Afghan, the Rohilla Pathan Sardars,
yes,
and
yes.
who are a very strong force, and perhaps they were the main clan behind the military exploits of the Nawab. So,
Yes, because it was, you see, I'm sorry, it was a sort of a system, whereas the Sardars were considered to be sharik, or a part of the whole political system. They were standing with the Nawabs, and so the Nawab has insulted one of the Sardars. It was a very huge thing at that time. Um, but
yeah.
unfortunately, the family, instead of contesting it and rescuing Firoza Begum, decides to run away, and that was the tragedy of the whole story.
So, like you say, that it's very difficult to believe that there's a girl or there's a woman with a child, and she herself is so awed by the looks, perhaps the physical beauty, and the grandeur of a Nawab, that she herself wants to stay over there. I mean, it's not uncommon back in those days for married women to get attracted to despots. Yet, despite that, to give credit to you, you went ahead and you wanted to scratch the surface, and perhaps that comes from your um, own view of telling the story from the perspective of a woman, which rarely comes out, because we see this thing about a lal parda, which is perhaps very symbolic, and
Mm.
the life behind the lal parda, which is the zanana, and the life on this side of the lal parda is very different. The story which we are generally told through our readings is that of what happens in the court, what happens on this side of the parda. But you choose to tell the story on the other side. And I'm sure that was a very challenging task. And despite that, you have managed to present to us a very beautiful story. And once again, I would like to congratulate you. And with that,
Thank
I would
you.
like to ask you is that what kind of research, like usually you had these secondary sources with you, like the example which you quote over here, the diary of Bilqis Begum, but what kind of other sources did you use in your research? I mean, did you go through interviews, or did you go and just spend time like a non-participant observer, talking to people and asking them what was happening, and then drew out relevant material from there to put together in your book as a story? Tell us a bit about your research. How did you go about it?
Okay, so thank you. That's again a very intelligent question. So the research was the key to the story, because I just couldn't write historical fiction without really having done in-depth research. There were written histories at the library. There were a number of unofficial histories which were written also. Plus, there were records. So you see, for instance, we did not know how this Begum died. Now, the oral history was totally confused about the death of this Begum. They just knew that she died and where she was buried, etc. that took me to a sanatorium in Bhavali. Incidentally, and through the records of the sanatorium over there, and through the records of the telegrams and the letters that went back and forth. Again, these letters and telegrams I found at the regional archives at Allahabad. So, piecing it together, and you come across something. I think every researcher knows this delight of suddenly coming across something and which says that, oh, this is what really happened, you know. So by looking at the letters by the Nawab, by the officials, the telegrams, etc., etc., I came to know another aspect of the story. And then I had to go to this Bhavali sanatorium, so close to your home and mine in the hills, where I found records of this Begum and what was the time that she was admitted, etc., etc. And again, oral history that had been passed down over there as well. You see, now we give a lot of importance to oral history now. Earlier, people did not give importance to oral history. But what I realized was that once you start talking to people, you will realize that people are repeating the same things again and again. So those are the repetitions that have come down the generations. So another aspect of the research was the places or the monuments or the buildings where this harem might have been. Where was this Lal Parda that we that has been spoken about and written about in the local histories? The Lal Parda was the Zanana area. So where did the Zanana area begin? What were the pathways to the Zanana? How did the Nawab go to the Zanana? How did he call the women? So again, a bit of luck, a bit of research, because these buildings have been broken down and schools have been established over there. So then finding out these old pathways, all this, kind of took about 4 years. And then only after I had pieced together everything, I could really come up with this story and be confident that, yes, as much as possible, it was true.
I must say, a lot of hard work has gone into uh, creating historical fiction, because usually what people
Yes.
do is that they read a book and then they base another book on that, or say two or three books. That's how usually historical fiction is created, because you have the facts before you. But here, not only did you have to put together the facts, also you had to create your own story, because it appears, I mean, to the reader, and also uh, when one goes through reviews which have been published, and I must compliment you again in the manner in which your book has been received, and hence there are so
Thank
many
you.
reviews. And I was reading that a lot of reviews mention the place Rampur, whereas you never make a mention of it. Of course, you had your own reasons for doing that, even though it is more like a work of history, but you present it as a historical fiction. So, if I may ask you very briefly, why did you choose to not present this work as history when you had put together so much research into your work?
Yeah, I think that was the most difficult decision, because and it came right at the end, at towards the last edits,
So you were
because you
working on
see,
a work of history, and then somewhere down the line you had to take this call, a tough one, I
yes,
would say,
yes,
to present
yes.
it as a work of historical fiction.
Because you see, when you write historical fiction, how can you be you have to have some elements of fiction. Either you just write a historical paper, but when you have characters and when you have dialogues and when you have scenes and incidents, they can't be 100% history, right? So since the element of fiction was there, and I never wanted anybody to be hurt by anything I said or anything I wrote or any of the characters. For that reason, it was at the end I decided to mention it, that it was based on true events, but not really presented as 100% history. I think that was the toughest decision that I had to take. But oh well. I decided to
Easily,
take
I
it.
mean, the amount of, I mean, once again, I reiterate because there's a certain very popular author who has written extensively on the history of India. He has reconstructed the revolt of 1857 and all of that. And he has
Yes.
related stories which read more like fiction, but they are, that is presented to us as history without taking any names over here. So I must compliment you for that. And
Thank you.
I think, do you think it's time for you to read something from your book, a part of the book which you like? Any part. I will not ask you to
Yes.
point out any aspect of what you're trying to present, but just one part.
Okay, so this is the part where Firoza Begum, who has decided to attend Savni or monsoon celebration party at the house of the Nawab, she this finds out that the person that she had met and she had kind of insulted is actually the Nawab. So there are stories, whispers, and then there is the truth. My story can draw from any of these or from all of these. That evening, Firoza Begum and her family entered through the ladies' entrance to the Darbar Hall of Benazir Palace. It led to a gallery that ran around the hall, shuttered with split bamboo curtains hanging on elaborate arches to shield the ladies from the male eye. Because you remember, it is the farda system that was there, so they had to be behind the parda. A eunuch ushered them to their seats to the right of the royal throne, where they had a good view of the proceedings. The lights in the viewing gallery were low, such that only the silhouettes of the ladies, with a gleam of color, could be discerned by an attentive male eye. Firoza sat close to the frieze, peering at the hall resplendent with glittering chandeliers, turbaned kings, bejeweled in their long jama kurtas, the noblemen and British officers in their smart trousers and red coats with badges and insignia. The musicians were seated at the center on a platform with Munga Jan, glamorous in her red and gold dancing costume, lit and ready, her tinkling feet beating a rhythm. The chobdars or mace bearers entered the hall and announced the arrival of the Nawab, reciting his high sounding titles Amirul Umra, Farzande Ala, Daulate Inglishiya. Everybody rose from their seats, and the British officers tucked their black hats under their arms. Munga Jan bent double with her salam. Zubaida Begum, Zubaida Begum is the mother, asked Firoza to get back to the seat. Ammi, no one can see me from here, from outside. Let me look at the Nawab once. The Nawab entered with quick, impatient steps, his head surging ahead of his body, flanked by the British agent and the chief minister. The British and Pathan officers followed. By any standards, his frame was unimpressive and puny, but clothed in a cleverly padded, flesh-colored brocade sherwani. The ruby gleaming at his surpage and the pearl and diamond strings covering the pigeon chest created a dazzling aura of royalty. The Nawab turned to speak to his chief minister, the immaculately clipped moustaches quivering with his smile. It was an unremarkable face, imprinted with an arrogance that befitted all the tales of despotism she had heard whispered about him. Bibi, it's him. Tabu clutched her hand and whispered. He knew her. She had insulted the Nawab and identified herself as the daughter of Mia Jan Khan. And of course, after that, she's terrified. So,
Amitabh sir, you are on mute. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying that's a very interesting way of presentation because moments ago she had encountered the Nawab, and now she gets to know who he is without knowing who he was then. And you have made liberal use of poetry uh, in your book, and that is another aspect of your book which I loved very much, because I like
Yes, of
poetry.
course.
So if you will allow me, I will read further ahead from where you left it.
Please do.
Because when
Please
he
do.
enters, so the Nawab, apparently these Nawabs have the privilege of having ustads, and ustads are actually on their rolls. So the Nawab, in effect, is a patron to his own ustad. So here,
Yes.
the Nawab began with salutations to his teachers and then paused. His gaze concentrated on the quivering shadow, like you just read. Quivering red shadow of the lamp, looked up and said, "This afternoon, I composed a ghazal in honor of a chance meeting that left me yearning." And here what we see is the style of poetry that was written, that was said, I would say, क्योंकि उसमें शायरी में जो जो लोग पोइट्री करते हैं उनको कहते हैं पोइट्री शेर कहना. सो जो शेर जो लखनऊ दबिस्तान लखनऊ में कहा जाता था, उसका एक आपने एक बेहतरीन आपने मिसाल यहाँ हमारे सामने रखी है. तो आई विल रीड इट. दो शेर जो नवाब ने कहे वहां पर. किया उसने कत्ल और मैंने मुआफ, किया उसने कत्ल और मैंने मुआफ, अबस सहले शहर उसका चर्चा करें. She slew me and I forgave her. Needlessly the townfolk talk of her. The Nawab touched his forehead, acknowledging the appreciative wah-wah, and turned towards the enclosure where Firoza sat and continued reciting his ghazal. वो जब आपसे अपना पर्दा करें, वो जब आपसे अपना पर्दा करें, तो बंदे क़बा किस तरह वां करें. When she keeps herself veiled from me, how can I unknot her tunic? He finally stood up, the eyelids half closed, and said the last lines in honor of her anger. उन्हें क्यों हो नाजिम कयामत का डर, उन्हें क्यों हो नाजिम कयामत का डर, जो हर रोज एक फितना बर्पा करें. She fears not the apocalypse, O Nazim, for she construes anarchy every day. So please tell us what about your background and your exposure to Urdu poetry and what got you to introduce it. You could have done very well writing a book without interspersing your prose with poetry. Why did you choose to do that, and what is your background with poetry? Tell us a bit about it.
Actually, I am not really the kind of person, at least I felt that I was never the kind of person who was into a lot of poetry or sher shayari, but it was there around us, you see. While we were growing up, I guess this is something that I realized, which we haven't given to our children. It was absolutely normal for us to know the important ghazals by Ghalib or Dag or Mir. It was just a part of what we were, and because I grew up in Aligarh and I studied at Aligarh Muslim University, where we had to take up Urdu, and I decided to take up Urdu, that is advanced Urdu, because I loved the language and it was my language, and learned a bit of ghazals, and we were introduced to singing ghazals, etc., etc. So it just became a part of who we were without realizing uh, it was a part of me. And it wasn't like I was all the time listening to ghazals or poetry or whatever. But when I started writing, especially because that was the atmosphere of the time. If a person was an educated person, he would be writing. It was, it was impossible. All the Nawabs were writing. They were writing, most of them were writing poetry. Their women were writing poetry. Their daughters and their wives were writing and singing poetry. So it was a social, cultural milieu of the time. And when you write of that age, you have to write of poetry. There's no way that you can leave out poetry from the atmosphere that was there at that time, and which is, I feel, sadly missing now. I feel that kind of a absorption with words, with thoughts, and that kind of a sensitivity is really missing. So maybe through my work, I want to bring it back. I want it to be a normal thing in the daily conversation, maybe. I don't know if that would happen in my yeah,
It
but
was, like you said,
anyway, it's just
part of your
something
growing
that
up,
is
and
there.
also poetry was very much a part of the culture of these quotes at that time. And
Yes,
you took the name of Dag Dehel. Dag Dehel, we received patronage from Rampur. I mean, of course, your story
yes,
about Sherpur, so we'll not get there. And another element which is very interesting in your book is of Dastan Goi. Of course, it's part of your title also, the Begum and the Dastan. So
yes.
uh, perhaps this may have gone into at the stage of into your story writing or storytelling at the stage of conceptualization, when you thought that you're going to intersperse the story of the Begum, uh, taking references from the diary, and then getting a story in between through the Dastan Go. Because the Dastan Go is more or less telling the same story, which is happening in the book otherwise, the story of Begum Feroza. So, how did this idea come to you? Because you know what, it was like Yash Chopra trying to make a blockbuster film, and he has all the elements ready. That this is what is going to make a book very successful. You knew all the elements, even though this was your first book. How did you come to that?
It'll really surprise you that the Dastan section came at the end. I had written the whole story of Firoza Begum. Actually, there are three strands to this book. One is Firoza Begum and what is happening to her, and then there is her great granddaughter Amira, who is living in the present age, and she is listening to Firoza Begum's story while she is having her own problems. She's dealing with their own problems. And the third strand is that of a Dastan Go, or a storyteller who's living at the same time as Firoza Begum, and he's a storyteller, like we are storytellers, and he wants to tell the people the story, disguise the story like a fantasy, but he wants to tell the people that, look, this is what's happening in your town. This is what the Nawab is doing. So he's disguising that story and conveying it to the people, and people understand what he's trying to say. So this the though the title of the book is The Begum and the Dastan, but the Dastan was the element that came right at the end. And it just, I don't know, it just happened that I had this person, because I was researching about the Dastan Goi, that tradition of Rampur. This was till the 1960s. There were Dastans that were being narrated in the courtyards of Rampur. It was this last generation that heard those Dastans. And so I was reading about these Dastan Gos, and suddenly one of the Dastan Gos, that is Kallan Mirza, who's a real person who lived very close to where my in-laws' house and sister house is, just became a part of the story. And it was like he decided that, okay, I want to tell this story also. So, so he became another person narrating the same story, but in a fantasy. And somehow when I started writing about Firoza Begum's story as a fantasy, it just became so amazing. Like, you had this evil king, and you had this Lala Ro who was kidnapped by the evil king, and then there were fairies, and I just got carried away. And again, I'm not a fantasy person, fan of fantasy fiction also, but it was so much fun. I think most of it was just good fun.
Also, I would say that in a way, the element or the presence of the Dastan Go in the story, it complements your story, because on the one hand we have what is happening with the elite, and then on the other hand
Yes.
we have what is being told amongst the masses. So that in a way
Yes.
completes the whole story. And again with the Dastan Go, and I'm getting tempted over here because of my own selfish interests in poetry, that again the Dastan Go also is fond of poetry. of course, that is part of tradition, and you do make it a point to mention something. So I would like to just read how he introduces himself with part of one nazm, perhaps, which has been borrowed by him from some work. I don't know if it is a work of fiction or it is a real book, but this has been drawn from Saki Nama by Muhammad Hussain Jah. You will tell me if this is.
Yes.
It is there.
Yes, it is there. Okay, it was written by Muhammad Hussain Jah, and Saki Nama begins the Dastan. So please do read. I love to hear it in your voice.
Excuse me for my ignorance on that count.
No, not at all.
I'll try. You know, it's very difficult to read Urdu in Roman script. I'll try and read it here. शायद वैसे scope allow नहीं करता है, but if you had somehow maybe in your next edition you can consider that, adding Nastaliq to this Roman script.
Yes, I would love to. Yes.
I mean, just a suggestion. So ये क्या फरमाते हैं मोहम्मद हुसैन जहाँ साहब, और बकौल मोहम्मद हुसैन जहाँ कल्लन दास्तान को क्या फरमाते हैं कि मैं तू बेशिकंदे साकी, मैं तू बेशिकंदे साकी, अभी फसले बहार है बाकी. If this wasn't Orange Literature Festival, I would not have read out the English translation, but here I will. तो मैं तू बेशिकंदे साकी, अभी फसले बहार है बाकी, अभी बाकी हैं दिन जवानी के, ऐशो इशरत के कामरानी के. तो उठो आओ मैं कदे को चलो, बज़्म रिंदान को चलो, बज़्म रिंदान को चल के रौनक दो, रूह जमशेद की कसम तुमको, अपनी उम्मीद की कसम तुमको, लबे सागर के फिर लोबों से, फिर सुराही के गले से मिलो, अपने साकी को मेहरबान पाया, वक्त अफसाना गोई का फिर आया. I saw Aanchal was looking at the watch, so I will not read out the translation because I don't want this part to be edited. And I'll quickly ask you, Tarana, that even though it has already been mentioned in your introduction by Aanchal that you are working on a new project, so I'll ask you two quick questions. Aanchal, I believe we have only that much time.
Yes, sir.
The two quick questions as to what is your next project, and the second one is that what advice would you give to young writers with regard to having their works published?
My God, the time has really flown. Yeah. I was really enjoying myself. I wish we had more time. Yes, I wish. But we'll get together in Nainital over.
Most certainly, yes.
Yes, and talk more. So my next book is called Rampur, Cuisine, Culture, Food Memories. And this is about the culture of Rampur. These are essays and there are some recipes as well. So that's coming out in April 2022. And at present, I'm writing a sort of a fiction again. It is based on my book club. So you and I know how important book clubs are, socially, and just to support us through as writers and freelance people. I think we really need that encouragement, and my book club has been a very important part of my life. So that's something about the book that I'm writing at present, but it has another milieu as well, which I won't reveal right now. Now, my advice to writers is that you should be ready to be extremely patient, and patience is not my forte really, but I think writing has taught me that you need to write and rewrite and be humble enough to accept corrections and rejection, because every time you get up, you're a writer again. But every time you just decide, oh my God, I can't do it and I can't rewrite, you stop being a writer. So that's my advice. I don't know. I think every writer has rewritten several times any book.
You have my best wishes for your upcoming ventures. And
Thank you so much.
Like you said, कि वक्त का पता ही नहीं लगा कि कैसे, as if time flew.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Aanchal, for having us on board.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. I would just like
Thank
to.
you, Achal, and thank you, Orange City Lit Fest. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all. Thank you for having us.
I would just like 2 minutes from you both for the closing note. So, at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Tarana Husain Khan and Mr. Amitabh Singh Baghel who joined us today. We wish we get to hear you both again and be equally enlightened as we all are today. And for my dear massive audience, I am sure that after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking home an enriched version of yourself, just as I will. Thank you for joining us today. Until I see you again. This is Anchal Bhatia signing off.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Anchal, and thank you very much, Orange Lit Fest. And of course, you'll see us if you call us.
Yes, yes, you will.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Have a nice evening.
You too have a great time. Thank you so much, Amitabh, for doing this.
Thank you very much, Tarana.
Welcome to Rise Sony Group, a vision beyond.